Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 10th installment of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links Best Deck series. Today I'm going to be showing you a Weevil Burn deck. Just before the video starts, I'd just like to say this deck is very competitive. I've based my list off of two people from the KC Cup who got very high ranking on Reddit. So just like the last video, if you're looking to climb ranks, I would say this deck would be a pretty good way to do it. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, the best character for this deck is Weevil Underwood with the skill Parasite Infestation. This is the only skill you can use for this deck as it's kind of core. What the skill does is after starting hands are dealt, a random number of Parasite Paracide cards added to your opponent's deck face up. Parasite Paracide is a card that once it's in your opponent's deck, when your opponent draws the card, it is special summoned to their side of the field in face-up defense position and inflicts 1000 points of damage to them. Then while this card is face-up in the field, all monsters your opponent controls become insect-type monsters. I won't go too much into detail with Parasite Paracide now. Later on in the video I'll talk much more about this card and why the deck is built around this ability. Alright, now we'll take a look at the deck list. The cards in this deck are 1 Big Shield Gardna, 1 Hane-Hane, 1 Sphere Kuriboh, 2 Pumprincess the Princess of Ghosts, 2 4-star Ladybug of Doom, 1 Cobra Jar, 3 Gyaku-Gire Pandas, 1 Enemy Controller, 2 Burning Land, 2 Master of the Accursed, 3 Jade Insect Whistles, and 1 Windstorm of Etaqua. Now this version of the deck is very good all round for ladder, it's very just strong in general, but currently there is a very specific deck that's popular, is just very popular, and that is relinquished decks. So if you're finding that every second game you're versing a relinquished opponent, I'd recommend replacing your Big Shield Gardna and your Hane-Hane with a possessed Dark Soul. This card allows you to tribute it to take control of all face-up level 3 or lower monsters your opponent controls. So pretty much you take control of relinquished. The original variant of this deck list that I saw on Reddit, the two people that did two separate decks, both used Possessed Dark Soul. It's very good at countering certain meta cards, which mainly is relinquished. It also is good against the Jelly Bean Man and a few others, but mainly it just counters relinquished decks. Alright, let's get into the strategy of this deck. Alright, so this deck works by using your Jade Insect Whistles to draw Parasite Paracide cards to the top of your opponent's deck. Because once it's at the top of your opponent's deck, its ability will activate when your opponent draws it, it will special summon it to the field, and your opponent will take 1000 points of damage. Also very importantly, once this card is on the field, it is now completely useless. Your opponent now has a 2-star 500 attack, 300 defense monster on the board. So basically it takes up an empty monster slot when your opponent only has 3 monster slots. This combined with a variety of damaging spells and damaging monsters allows you to slowly whittle away at your opponent's life points until they eventually reach 0. This deck is very slow. You aim to win purely by chipping away at your opponent's life points very slowly and making their board pretty useless using cards such as Mask of the Accursed, which means they cannot attack with whatever monster they have, and Parasite Paracide, which just leaves a slot on their board which they can't use. And all of this combined with a variety of delay monsters, traps and spells makes for a very slow, painful end to your opponent. If you don't understand how this deck works just yet, don't worry, I'll have gameplay at the end of the video which will show pretty much how this deck runs and the strategy behind it. Alright, let's go through the monster cards in this deck. The monster cards in this deck are Big Shield Gardna, Hane-Hane, Sphere Kuriboh, Pumprincess the Princess of Ghosts, Cobra Jar, Gyaku-Gire Panda, and 4-star Ladybug of Doom. Big Shield Gardna is a card I really want to talk about. Its defense points is 2600, so when you play in defense mode and your opponent swings at it, they're going to take a lot of battle damage. Because normally it will be face down and your opponent won't know what it is, so they'll just swing at it blindly, which happens every time you play this card, 100% of the time. This card alone can do anywhere from 700 damage to above 1000 damage to your opponent's life points, just by having it in face down defense position. Obviously the drawback to this card is, once it has been attacked by one monster, and a damage step has been completed, it is changed to face up attack position. But in this deck specifically, that's not necessarily that bad, because this deck quite often makes your opponent only have one monster that's able to attack, thanks to Parasite Paracide, which takes up one of the monster slots, and Mask of the Accursed, which doesn't let one of your opponent's monsters attack at all. Plus this deck runs Enemy Controller, Sphere Kuriboh, and Windstorm of Etaqua, which all stop your opponent attacking. So quite often, once this card has been attacked and done its damage, it can then just go back to defense position and become a block, which most likely your opponent will never swing into because they don't want to take another 1000 points of damage against a Weevil Burn deck. Now I'm not sure about Hane-Hane in this deck. I believe it can just be replaced by a second Big Shield Gardna, but I've been trying out Hane-Hane. It is pretty successful a card. Essentially what Hane-Hane does is once your opponent attacks it, it flips and you can return an opponent's card to their hand. So it applies 2 blocks. 1, the initial attack, and 2, it prevents an opponent attacking by returning a card to their hand. Which, sometimes when returning a monster card to your opponent's hand is very useful due to your ability, which puts the Parasite Paracide cards in their deck, obviously. Because for those cards to proc and their ability to work, there has to be an empty slot on your opponent's board. So Hane-Hane has some kind of synergy with that, as also it provides blocks to defend your life points, as this deck is very slow so you need to keep defending yourself. But as I said, this card isn't really required for this deck. I'd say you can interchange it with another Big Shield Gardna, maybe another Sphere Kuriboh or Enemy Controller, but I would try out this card if you have it, as it's pretty underrated, I think. Sphere Kuriboh is probably the most used card in the game at the moment. Simply, whenever your opponent attacks, you can discard this card from your hand and it will change that monster to defense position. So it's just a free block that is very, very, very rarely negated. And once your opponent's cards are in defense position, quite often they're really easy to kill. Such as a Rex Raptor's Dino deck has a bunch of high attack dinosaurs, but the defense is not so high. So it becomes possible to be able to kill them off, which I'll talk more about once I get to the Gyaku-Gire Panda. Pumprincess, the Princess of Ghosts, is a very strong delay card. Simply you place this card in defense position, and when your opponent kills it, it goes into your spell and trap card zone as a continuous spell. With the ability, every turn that goes by, 100 extra damage is reducted from your opponent's attack points. This applies to every monster they have and every turn. That's your opponent's turn and your turn. Soon as this card lives for 4 turns, that's 400 attack your opponent has just lost. Which, keep in mind, 4 turns is your turn, your opponent's turn, your turn again, and then your opponent's turn again. So unless your opponent runs a ton of D-spells, this card is going to get very annoying and can pretty much win you the game by itself. Because essentially once it reaches 10, 15 stacks, something ridiculous like that, your opponent just can't attack you ever, and it will just give you permanent delay for them to draw your Parasite Paracide cards, or for you to slowly burn them to death with your burn effects. Cobra Jar is in this deck for 2 reasons. 1, it provides 2 blocks, because once it dies, it spawns another token, which can be used as a second block. And 2, the second block, or the token, does 500 damage to your opponent once it has been killed by battle damage. So this makes it a very solid defense card and defensive card, and it's very, very good for this deck. Gyaku-Gire Panda is a very strong card in this deck. In general, it's a pretty bad card, but in this deck it is just mental. First of all, we'll go through its main ability, which is it gains 500 attack per enemy monster your opponent has, which most of the time your opponent will have a nearly full board and a nearly useless full board. Cards like Parasite Paracide and Mask of the Accursed will fill up your opponent's board and make it just useless. Also, cards like Pumprincess will allow your opponent to just always have their cards in defense position because they don't want them to be attacked when they have 0 attack, because that will mean they'd take a ton of battle damage. Meaning most of the time Gyaku-Gire Panda will have between 1800 and 2300 attack points, which makes it mental for a 3-star monster. The second part of this card is when it attacks something in defense position. Whenever this card attacks something in defense position, unlike other monsters, battle damage will still go through. So when it's attacking Parasite Paracide cards, it can do up to 2000 damage to your opponent's life points, which is just another reason this card synergizes so well with this deck. So overall, this card's very good at getting a bit of chip damage into your opponent, or just one-shotting him to finish him off. 4-star Ladybug of Doom is in this deck purely as another delay card. You put it face down on turn 1 or 2 whenever you like, and whenever your opponent swings into it, it flips and destroys all level 4 monsters your opponent controls. And level 4 monsters are by far the most popular monster level in the game. So this card can literally wipe your opponent's board. It can kill 3 monsters if it wanted to. It's a pretty strong card, very good at delaying, very solid in this deck. Alright, let's go through the spells and traps in this deck. The spells and traps in this deck are Enemy Controller, Windstorm of Etaqua, Mask of the Accursed, Burning Land, and Jade Insect Whistle. The first 2 cards, Windstorm of Etaqua and Enemy Controller, are purely used just like Kuriboh. If you don't have any of these cards, like you don't have an Enemy Controller, you don't have a Windstorm of Etaqua, or you don't have a Kuriboh, you can just replace it with another copy of these cards. So most commonly, I think Enemy Controller is the most popular. So if you have an extra Enemy Controller, you can replace a Kuriboh or a Windstorm of Etaqua with one. Simply they're used when your opponent attacks with a monster, or in Windstorm of Etaqua case multiple monsters, you just change their position to defense position, which has some synergy with Gyaku Panda and also stops you taking damage. Enemy Controller has a little bonus effect where it can take control of your opponent's monster, which sometimes can leave their board empty, so you can just swing at their opponent's life points directly, but that's pretty rare, but it does happen. Mask of the Accursed is in here to make your opponent's board useless, and also make your opponent slowly lose life points. This combined with cards like Burning Land will mean your opponent will take anywhere of up to 1500 damage a turn. And with cards like Mask of the Accursed attached to their monsters, not allowing them to attack, combined with Enemy Controllers, Windstorm of Etaquas, and Kuribohs, your opponent will never be able to attack you, and he will just slowly burn to death. The final spell in this deck is Jade Insect Whistle. This card is very core to this deck. As insect type monsters are very rarely played, this card works roughly 90% of the time. You play it and it will draw a Parasite Paracide card from in your opponent's deck to the top of the deck. So not only does this mean your opponent's draw is going to be worthless, it also means your opponent's draw is going to do 1000 damage to them, and place a useless monster on the board to fill up their monster zones. So yeah guys, that's pretty much it for this deck. Stick around if you want gameplay for it, but otherwise that's pretty much it for the video, and I'll catch you guys next time.
I can't wait to swat you!
Step right up!
Duel!
My turn! No retreat! I summon a monster and attack! I set a card! I set a card!
It's my turn. Draw! The spell card, Jade Insect Whistle! The sound drives your deck's insects wild! I set a monster face down from my hand! activate an equip spell. From my hand, I activate a continuous spell. I end my turn.
My turn. I draw, punk.
Parasite Paraside's effect activates.
You ain't one yet.
I activate a continuous
You
spell.
ain't one yet. This is it. I summon a monster in attack position. Battle time. This'll pack a wallop. I attack with a monster. I
Get
end
ready.
my turn.
Let's draw. I activate an equip spell.
This
My
ain't
monster's
right.
effect activates. I activate a continuous spell.
I'll teach you to mess with
That
me.
is my turn.
My turn.
That won't
I
help.
draw.
My monster's attack won't help. I activate a continuous spell.
This ain't right. Battle. I've got this in the bag. My monster attacks
My
you
monster's
directly.
effect activates. Throw in
My
the
turn's
towel
over.
already. I activate an equip spell. My
I might
monster's
actually
effect
lose?
activates. I activate a continuous spell. That was nothing.
I'll teach you to mess with
That
me.
is my turn.
My turn. I draw.
My monster's effect. I don't think so. I activate a continuous spell.
I might actually lose. Ha-ha! Battle time! I've got this in the bag. I attack your life points directly.
Go back and crawl into...